Hello, I'm Jothy Rosenberg, the host of Designing Successful Startups, where today's guest is Kelly Bruno. You're like the queen of grit, in my opinion. You were born without a complete leg.
I mean, even at a young age, I knew, 4 or 5 years old, but it wasn't really until I would say middle school. And I think that's when I started to really notice and acknowledge the difference.
Kelly Bruno is a board-certified physician in anesthesiology and pain medicine, currently practicing at Yale University. She's also an avid athlete, competing in able-bodied and para-sports since she was 14 years old, in everything from track and field to ultramarathons and Ironmans. Currently, she's chasing a record in the marathon. Combining her interest in medicine and sports, she previously co-founded a training company called Complete Human Performance and is now pivoting to longevity and performance medicine. And here is Kelly.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's great to have you, and it's been a long time. You've been a very busy woman. I always like to start, so everybody kind of gets a little bit of a grounding, by asking you, where are you originally from, and where do you live now?
Okay, good start. I actually grew up overseas, so I spent a lot of time living Germany, South Africa, and then the last place I lived was Florida. And I'm actually in Connecticut now, and outside New Haven.
Normally I talk about grit sort of at the end of a podcast when I'm talking to a startup founder. But there's an obvious reason why I would really like to actually start with where all your grit comes from, because you're like the queen of grit, in my opinion. First, you were born without a complete leg. And is it on the left side or the right side?
It's on the right.
You don't have an ankle or a foot. But you have your knee. Your knee works just fine. And so you grew up, with either going around without a prosthetic leg, or you very early on you got a little prosthesis, and then you had to get new ones each time you grew a little bit. You of course didn't know any different until you started to interact with other kids who noticed that there was something different about you. When did that really start to, affect the way you thought about yourself? Because before that, it was just how you were. But suddenly, at some point, people were saying, "Oh, look, Kelly's different." When did that start?
Yeah. I mean, even at a young age, I knew, 4 or 5 years old, but it wasn't really until I would say middle school. And I think that's pretty normal when I started to really notice and not acknowledge the difference. I was 12 years old when I had a very major surgery. I had a double osteotomy, so 2 wedges of bone were removed, the leg was straightened, and I had an external fixator, which is basically 8 pins that came out of my skin and were attached to a rod, and that was in for about 3 months to allow the bone to heal. And in that time, I couldn't wear a prosthesis, and, it was pretty unwieldy device I was wearing, and there was no way to hide it. And that was, I couldn't walk, I was on crutches or in a wheelchair, and that was really when I had a formal acknowledgement or understanding that I was different than everyone else.
Did kids make fun of you? Did kids tease you? Was it traumatic?
It's very traumatic. It's something that I've, looked back on, and it was definitely, just had a huge impact on, I think, the direction that my life moved in, and also the person I became. I think even more so than people making fun of me or teasing me, it was the internal conversation I had. It was people staring at me and then me wondering what they were thinking, feeling deformed or feeling, different. And so it almost didn't matter if they were making fun of me verbally or outwardly. It was, the internal dialogue I had with myself that I was different, that, I kind of assumed everyone was laughing at me or, uncomfortable around it. And I would say I don't have memories of, kids outwardly making fun of me. I know that I have no doubt that there were conversations. I was in 7th grade, but I also had a strong, support system. And so luckily I just kind of was shielded some.
But you could have started to feel really beaten down, and it could have sent you in one direction. But something in you made you fight back in a way, in a very positive way, that made you want to sort of, I'll show them. Is that the right sentiment? Does that resonate, or do I have it wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was as much for them as for me. It was there was again, it was almost like, I'll show me. I think it was very internally motivated that I had something to prove to them, but to myself almost more. I wanted to be more. I wanted to be as capable. And so there was, again, this almost internal motivator of, I need to do these things. I can do these things. I am not less. And so rather than get pulled down by that, depression or discouragement of not being able to use my leg or walk or do these things, I was essentially finding ways to be more active, and luckily had outlets for that. And again, have always been driven by that personal motivator, that internal like voice, kind of pushing myself to prove something to the world. I think the world in a way would have been like, go sit on the sideline. You deserve it. It's okay. And I wouldn't take that out.
When you started to discover that sports was an outlet for you to excel and to start proving to yourself. But of course, you're a normal person surrounded by a bunch of people and who were treating you as different. But there was a pointed time, partly because of sports, where that flipped and people started to look at you completely differently and be amazed and inspired. And when did that start to happen? When did you feel that amazing shift?
Yeah, I remember back when I was very little. I was put in a swim class, and the swim instructor, I think had no experience with someone with a disability or a limb loss deficiency or impairment, and so he told my mom she will never swim. She will never be able to swim. And they put me in the water, and I would, swim in a circle basically because I couldn't, kick with both legs. And I, and I can't fault him. He didn't know what he was doing, but I remember later kind of learning this and being like, that's not true. Like, and of course I doubled down, right? I mean, that was a stupid, I'm going to prove this guy wrong. I'm going to learn how to swim. And, many years later I was doing Ironmans, and I swam just fine. So, there was that, but really for the transition for me, it was when I started running track and field. And, fortunately I became involved in a disabled program at the time for USDST, the U.S. Disabled Sports Team. And that program really developed athletes with physical disabilities or physical impairment. And I took that into, I think once other kids started seeing me, I had a running blade, and they were just, it was so different, and they got so excited about it. They thought it was so cool and so interesting. And I suddenly became, not the like kind of impaired one on the sideline. It was suddenly like, whoa, like we have this really cool, like, Blade Runner or bionic woman on our team, and a girl on our team, because I was maybe 14 at the time. And that was really where I get that transition. I think the other piece of that was being around other people with similar impairments. I had never had that before. So having that kind of like-minded, physically similar just group of people was so motivating to me, because I almost had no excuse anymore, right? They were doing it. I can do it. They knew the problems I were having, so I could go, I could learn from them. Whereas when I was in, high school or middle school, none of the other kids knew anything about it. There was no one to ask. I was kind of in this on my own, and that was very troubling and difficult.
When did you transition from, okay, I'm gonna play basketball, I'm gonna run track and field, I'm gonna figure out how to swim straight. I had that same challenge. But then you went way beyond that. And when did that start to happen? You mentioned Ironman just a minute ago, but you've actually gone way beyond Ironman too. So maybe talk about when did you suddenly realize, oh, wow, I can do way more than just become equivalent?
I think it happened gradually. It was not something that happened overnight. Each time I accomplished something or I completed something, there was a little bit of that, I can do more than this. So I did a triathlon. My first triathlon was probably a sprint. I don't really remember anymore, but it was a sprint triathlon. And then, I did Olympic distance and I worked my way up to Ironman. And at that point I was like, well, I've done a marathon, so I guess I can do a marathon. So then I went, I started running, more road running at that point. That's always been my passion, always been my love from a physical kind of endeavor. And then I got into, I think part of it was being motivated by other people, what they were doing. And I'm like, oh, if they can do it, I should try it. I can do it. So I would see what other people were doing. I had some friends that were getting into ultramarathons at the time. I was working very long hours in the hospital. I just started residency. So I was doing, overnight calls, 24-hour calls in the hospital. And I said, oh, well, if I just did a run at the end of this 24-hour call, it basically, I'd already be tired from working. It's basically like ultra training, I could probably do an ultra. And so I started kind of exploring that. And then when I asked to sign up for a race, they said, well, you want to do the 50 or the 100 and a miler. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do this training, and I'm going to have this race ahead of me, like go big or go home. And so that's kind of been that mindset of, why not go all in and shoot for the 100? And that would be a major accomplishment. And if I just do the 50, then I just do the 50. But I felt like I don't want to limit my capacity to achieve by just signing up for the 50.
100 miles on a bike where I'm going average of 17 miles an hour takes almost 8 hours. How long does a 100-mile run take?
It's a long days, I should say. So for that, like URI 100 that I did that year, you got a belt buckle if you made it under 24 hours. And then the cutoff was around 30 hours. And I finished that year at 26 hours. It's a walk run. So, keep moving forward. The next year I went back and did it under 24. So that was a huge accomplishment. I ran it in just over 22 hours.
Okay, so I have to ask this. The skin on one's leg, unlike the skin on the bottom of our feet, is not, does it actually develop calluses? It's a different, we have different kind of skin on our hands and our feet. And you, no matter how hard you rub over here, you're never going to get a callus there. How does your residual limb survive being inside the socket, taking that pounding for 26 or 24 hours?
It's a mind-body experience. In that there's no way to do it without some kind of, chafing, blister, breakdown, skin breakdown. And it's just learning how to manage what does come up during the race. So it, like you said, there's no calluses. It never develops kind of that skin hardening. After so many miles of rubbing and wear and tear, it will, you'll develop something somewhere. It's being proactive. If you start feeling a spot that's rubbing or uncomfortable, it's, kind of managing it before it gets worse. And it's just a lot of learning as you go. And just knowing that it's probably going to be uncomfortable. I finished my first 100-miler. I was driving a stick at the time. I couldn't sit my leg back on. My leg just didn't. I couldn't even get my prosthetic leg back on after the race. I took it off at the finish line and there was no putting it back on. So I had to get a ride home. And then for the next 2 days, because I drove stick, I had to have a workaround because I had trouble getting my prosthesis on. So it was a lot of learning in that endeavor.
Okay, and so I happen to be someone who knows a little secret about you. You don't even put it in your bio. But how did you happen to get on Survivor Nicaragua?
So that was during medical school, and it was, I think, after being a follower of the U.S. Open, there had been some stories on me about just helping to develop some of the kind of the change in culture in some of these sports, and that got picked up by the USA Today and the Washington Post, and so there was some interest from more of a human interest side of having me on Survivor. And so I went and did the interviews, and they loved, just my story and, what I could offer in that, I guess in that venue, in that, type of media. And so I did.
Okay. But tell us about, you went on the show and the other participants in the show didn't know. You kept it a secret that you had a prosthetic leg. I guess you weren't wearing a blade. You had your normal prosthetic foot. And so since it was in a shoe and you wore like long pants, you were able to keep it from them, right?
Yeah, as best I could. Yes. I'm surprised that no one noticed, I'll be honest. Like, looking back, I don't know how you would not have noticed. I had a custom-made blade at the time. So it was like a square foot. It did not have a foot shell on it. It was, and I was like stuffing it into like these dress shoes. I had to sleep with it at night. So there were 10 of us in like a very small bamboo frame kind of structure. And we would squeeze into this very small space to sleep at night. And I couldn't take my leg off. So I'm like trying not to let anyone run into it, because they're going to be like, what is this? What is this metal like sticking into my back, So it was very, very challenging. They all wanted to go in the ocean at one point, and I had to figure out, like, do I go in or do I not go in? Because I can't take my pants off, because that's going to kind of expose me. But do I go in with my pants on, or do I just say, like, hey, I'm going to hang back, I'm not going to join you? It was a tough like day. I think it was like maybe 24, 48 hours that I didn't share it with everyone, so that they could make a first impression of me without that clouding, their decision about who I am, about, my capabilities, that kind of thing.
I've never watched that show. I know that the whole idea is that people get pushed out. They failed at something. They get pushed out. Voted out. That's it. Okay.
Voted out. Yeah.
And like, how long did you last?
I was sixth, voted out sixth on my team. So I was on the show for about 3 weeks.
Was it fun?
So not too long. It was a great experience. It was really interesting. It was fun to do. It was challenging, but in a very different way than I expected. I was really prepared for the physical component of it. Having done what I had done, I was training for Ironman Lake Placid at the time, so I had that kind of physical, stamina. I thought that's what it was going to be. It wasn't, though. It was more emotionally challenging. It was mentally challenging. It was sitting there not doing anything all day. There was a physical piece to it. You're not eating. You're very lethargic. So just kind of moving around took a lot of effort, but it was really the emotional piece. It was not having the support that I was used to, right? There's no one to lean on. There's no one to run things by. There's no one to talk to. Or there are, but you can't trust them, right? Because everyone's there kind of ready to stab you. They're putting their own interests first.
Hi, the podcast you are listening to is a companion to my recent book, Tech Startup Toolkit: How to Launch Strong and Exit Big. This is the book I wish I'd had, as I was founding and running 8 startups over 35 years. It's like a memoir of my entrepreneurial journey. I tell the unvarnished truth about what went right, and especially about what went wrong. It's for the founder, the CEO, and wannabe founders of tech and non-tech startups. You can get it from all the usual booksellers, and also from the publisher at Manning.com. I hope you like it. It's a true labor of love. Now back to the show. And then we're going to talk about some of your other not non-physical, I guess, accomplishments. But before that, I just wanted to ask, so knowing what you've accomplished in medicine and everything, you're obviously well endowed with, intelligence, and you had to have a lot of drive, go to medical school. Not everybody can do that. Do you think that any of the things that you had to overcome with your leg, with your disability, did any of that, do you think, give you the drive, let's just say it's grit to go to medical school, to then go to residency and become an anesthesiologist?
I think about like who I am and the type of person that I've become, and I think a big piece of that is from the experiences I had at a young age. Being able to push myself, learning how to push myself, learning how to do things that maybe aren't standard for what you would expect, right? Most people would not. They kind of expect almost the bare minimum, right? Like, hey, you can walk. That's awesome. But I didn't want to just walk. I wanted to run. So I never held myself to the standard of like kind of average, I guess. I always wanted to be above that. And I think a lot of that was driven by this need and desire to prove myself, right? To show everyone else that I was equal. I think a lot of that was also learned though when I was able to kind of prove to myself and to others that I was capable of doing these things. I was able to, finish these events. I was good at them. It did give me the confidence to then go after, other types of goals. So not just physical ones, career goals, professional goals, those kinds of, experiences. I don't think that I have been deterred by things that seem challenging.
Like, how old were you when you pretty much decided that you wanted to go be a doctor?
It was kind of a circuitous path that I took. So my father was a doctor. I had from an early age kind of been interested in helping people, and I didn't know what that would look like. And it was in undergrad where, I had this decision, and I was pre-med. And I said, maybe being a doctor isn't exactly what I want to do. And so I actually didn't complete pre-med. I came out and I worked for a few years. And during that time, it was actually when I started working with Wounded Warrior Project and Soldier Ride. I had a friend who was an ex-Army Ranger. He had started a company. He said, hey, Kelly, I'm meeting a lot of these guys coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. They've lost limbs. Are you able to come and just talk to them and answer questions and help them see that their life's not over? And that was the point where I said, I can do more. I can help these people in a bigger way. And so that's when I made that decision to go back to medical school. I did a post-bac program, got all my, all the classes that I needed to complete to apply. And I think at that point I had more experience, and I had a good story. I was doing Ironmans at the time. So it was kind of a nice break. I started training. I was doing a lot of triathlons. But then I kind of pivoted my focus more once I started medical school to my studies.
And where did you go to medical school?
I was at the University of North Carolina.
Chapel Hill.
In Chapel.
But you lived in Durham, right?
I did. I was still a Dookie.
Yeah, so we're both Dookies.
And once a Dookie, always a Dookie.
When did you pick anesthesiology?
So that was kind of a path through medical school. I wanted to be in the operating room. I liked the idea of being in the operating room. I didn't want to be a surgeon. So anesthesiology was kind of a field where there was a lot of physiology. It was really interesting. And it was really, I don't know, it's just, it seemed like a good combination of things that I wanted. And then I had the opportunity, I knew at that point, so a lot of people can go from anesthesiology to pain medicine, and that was really a passion of mine. I knew pain medicine is kind of a unique field. It's one of the only fields of medicine where you're not treating an organ system, right? Pain is more of an experience. Most fields of medicine are anesthesiology. I guess that's a little different, but like cardiology, nephrology, right? Endocrinology. So you're treating systems in the body, neurology. Pain medicine is a totally different field. There's no organ system that creates pain. Pain is actually the end result. And that's what we're trying to treat, and we don't know where it's coming from. And so, I've known a lot of the people that I worked with, these wounded warrior, wounded vets that came out. They had, a lot of phantom limb pain, a lot of residual limb pain, and it just wasn't being treated well. And so I did a year fellowship at the University of California, San Diego, looking at some new, kind of exploring some new options for treating phantom limb pain and residual limb pain.
That's a field that's near and dear to my heart.
It's an important field.
So did you do your residency, all of your residency out in San Diego, or just that fellowship?
I did my fellowship there. I did my residency in anesthesiology at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. So I did medical school residency there. Yeah, I did. And then I wanted a little bit different type of program. And UCSD had a different approach to pain medicine that fit what I was looking for.
And then what brought you to Yale?
So that has been a recent transition, and that was mostly born out of an opportunity to build a new clinic there. Since I got into pain medicine, my focus has shifted a little bit with the opioid epidemic, and so starting to kind of shift that practice. One of the newer clinics is called a transitional pain clinic that has been opening up around the country, but really focusing on, high-risk patients with complex pain who struggle to come off opioids post-operatively. And so looking at ways to treat before, during, and after the surgery to help patients avoid the opioid dependence.
Will you still be doing anesthesiology in the operating room?
Yes, I currently am.
So you're on the staff. I mean, is this your first real job other than after your fellowship?
Oh, no. I was at the VA in San Diego at UCSD for 5 years. And I built, while I was there, I built a women's pain clinic. So my focus there was a little different. There was an initiative to, because it was, a VA system, so there's kind of a disparity between men and women. And so there's a very big focus right now on building kind of women's directed care because, obviously, within the military system, it's not a 50-50 ratio. So that's a minority. So they were kind of lumped in with the men. So the goal was to say, okay, we can't treat everybody the same. And so I was the only female pain physician on staff. And so I kind of piloted this women's pain clinic while I was there, which was very interesting. I've kind of departed from phantom limb pain, but I hope to get back to some of that and some other kind of areas in medicine at this point.
If this wasn't, enough, we can't leave out, of course, that while you were still in Durham and you were still training, you helped found, what was it called? Complete Human Performance? What was that startup about?
Yeah, so at the time, my partner and I were both training. We're both very heavily active. And I was an endurance athlete. I had always been, a runner, a triathlete. Those were kind of my focuses. And he was a lifter. And so I got him into running. He got me into lifting. And so we kind of had this, what we called hybrid training. And so a lot of that, our interest became, how do you combine these two? Because they're so different. There's, the strength component kind of takes away from the endurance component because you build muscle, you're heavier, you're not as efficient. And likewise, when you're doing high level endurance training, you're breaking down muscle. So how do you do these in a way that is synergistic and you're getting better at both? And that became really popular around the time because CrossFit was becoming a really big sport at the time, right? And kind of relies on, you need to be good at everything. You need to be, fast and have good speed, but also have endurance. You need, the strength. So it was perfect for that. And now it's high rocks. So there's been a number of sports that it's been really important for and really interesting to translate to. So at the time I was doing powerlifting and marathons. So one time I did a powerlifting meet and the next day I went and ran the Wilmington Marathon. And so it's just kind of showing I could do both and I could do both well. And in that, we started this company, Complete Human Performance, really focusing on the science behind this type of training. I did a lot of the behind the scenes, the kind of operations piece of it, in a website developed and, figuring out payment systems and making sure articles were published and all of that. That was a big piece of, my role as COO of the company.
You did that for a number of years. How many years?
Yeah, we did that for about 7, 8 years. I started it in medical school, actually probably even longer, 10 years. I started in medical school, and then I ended up kind of leaving the company right after I finished my fellowship a few years ago, once I started practicing full time.
Do you sort of think about things that problems you want to solve and have ideas for other startups?
So yeah. I mean, the interest in one of the big focuses now is longevity medicine, looking at longevity performance, and really focusing on lifestyle medicine. And so I become really interested in that. I've seen the state of our healthcare systems. I've managed a lot of very sick patients in the operating room and in, psychotic pain clinics. I think that our conventional treatments are limited, and we need to start taking a different approach, because unfortunately the trajectory of kind of our societal norm is not on a healthy path. And being someone who is so active, who is so kind of all about like health and wellness, it's kind of frustrating to be in a system that's all about sick care and not health care. So looking at health span and improving health span during lifespan, right? Our lifespan's getting longer, but our health span is not. My focus now has shifted towards how do we kind of address that and say we need to take care of people earlier to prevent these problems or reverse them, not just treat them. And so starting to build on that, having the experience I have with starting Complete Human Performance, I've looked at really kind of translating that and what I learned there into starting a company. I have a couple of friends in different areas, physical therapy. One is more energetic medicine, and looking at building that into just a kind of virtual remote clinic that, helps people implement these lifestyle and longevity type treatments that will help in the long run.
Do you think you'll pull the trigger on starting that this year, next year?
So
what do you think?
My board certification. Yeah. So I just started my board certification for lifestyle medicine. So I should be board certified in lifestyle medicine by the end of the year. And that's a framework. And I anticipate starting by kind of end of this year to beginning of 2025. I think we'll get the pieces started because, as you know, it doesn't happen overnight. So there's a lot of pieces that we need to kind of lay the groundwork for, especially because a lot of the types of studies that we're doing. So insurance covers some of it, but a lot of it requires, I think we'll be working with companies that have already established protocols and also have some of the lab metrics and working with them to find a way to work together. And so kind of building relationships with these companies.
Do you have a name yet?
We do not have a name yet. We have some brainstorming ideas, but that's like the hardest decision to make.
It is absolutely. It's so funny how hard that is, and especially
those are the two.
Most of my startups, and I've done 9. I made the mistake of having a group of us try to come up with a name, and then on this one, I just said no, I'm not doing that as a group anymore. I'm going to come up with a name, and they're going to like it. I think we've covered a bunch of great stuff. I think it's been wonderful to hear all of this. I think people will enjoy this. And I want to thank you for participating in this podcast.
That's my pleasure. Yeah, it's always interesting to share.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Designing Successful Startups podcast. Check out the show notes for resources and links. Please follow and rate us at podchaser.com/designing successful startups. Also, please share and like us on your social media channels. This is Jothy Rosenberg saying, TTFN, ta-ta for now.